are we going to be seeing in Europe lots of multi-storey warehouses? As you know, I think as Slough's previous, or one of their previous operations that they took over with Brixton, they did some double-deckers down at Heathrow, and that took quite a long time for the second tier to go. And I think one of the issues you've got is that how expensive is it going to be to create full floor loadings over a number of floors, which does tend to get very expensive. At the moment, carrying on that theme, you've seen down, particularly in London, you've seen certain areas that supplied central London, Battersea, the Olympic Park area, have been taken out for now residential development. So you've got a twofold impact. One, you've got a clearance out of what was originally the last mile delivery, having to find somewhere else to go. And effectively, their clients moving in on their own sites, because a lot of these people obviously require the services. A few other points I've just noted down, going on to other questions we had before. In terms of longevity, everything around you, look at everything in this room virtually went through a shed. It didn't go through an office, it didn't go through residential, it didn't go through a shop. Everything has gone sometime through a shed. And I think increasingly that is now seen as why it no longer is a Cinderella product. It's got recognition. In Germany, another issue is there's land issues. The German government, the federal government, is trying to reduce the amount of development that happens across the country, and they're reducing the amount of permissions that they're going to be giving. They're trying to reduce them from about, I think the numbers are about 70, 75 square metres per day at the moment, down to heading towards 30. Now that reduction for a land-hungry operation like logistics is going to be quite crucial. And one of the other issues is, all the panel, everybody's been talking about the increasing use of e-commerce. E-commerce and a lot of other logistics functions need a lot more land, not just for the actual sheds, but for manoeuvring, for parking, and everything else like that. And essentially, a lot of it, particularly urban, centrally located property, is expensive. And it's actually trying to make sure that the numbers actually stick or stack up for developers, where you've only got, say, 20-25% site cover. And I think that is something that needs to be addressed going forward.
Okay, good. So, and in that sense, are you looking at those sort of inner city logistics actually competing at the moment with residential development for that land? Is that?
I think it's partially yes. The other partial is that if you look at the big logistics boys, I mean, you've got the Amazons that we've been talking about a lot. They've gone from doing their big e-fulfillment centres, 1 million square feet, down to the smaller edge of urban or urban locations. And I think that's increasing the trend for many of the other operators as well. And a lot of the products, I mean, logistics used to be everything above, say, 100,000 square feet, 10,000 square metres. And now we're going all the way down the chain, so that we've recently done is go up quite a lot on what I would describe as light industrial urban logistics, which hasn't really been fully publicised yet, but I think that's a sector very much that we're going to be going into, whereby a lot of people are now, that last mile delivery has very often to come through a local network, a local delivery station, if you will, because you can't have increasing numbers of huge trucks going through urban areas. And so you're going to actually have to think, how do we actually get this to this point of delivery? I think that's the crucial one of the crucial bits that still needs answering.
The last mile distribution center, and there's been a lot more talk about this over the past year or two. But let's not forget that Amazon did not invent the last mile. This is something DHL and the postal services have been doing for 20 years. What is new is that people are looking at closer in infill real estate with the view towards integrating it more tightly into the broader supply chain. So for sure, this will impact the way that logistics is sourced from a development standpoint and used. And it's no coincidence now that in the US, you see Amazon competing directly now with the FedExes and the UPSs. So expect this to continue. You know, just as we talked about with the potential Ocado acquisition, for sure the last mile supply chain will get more tightly integrated with the bigger box supply chain. Even so, I think to maybe one of Ingo's points about whether or not, well, we all kind of acknowledge, right, that logistics is no longer this specialized asset class as well. It's grown up a little bit. Now we've got a situation where it's respected among institutional investors and they know it. What I would suspect, and where I think this might be going, is that it might even become bigger. I can imagine a situation where 10 years from now, the people who were investing in office and residential and retail are really first interested in what's going on with logistics and what's going on with supply chain. To the question, hey, is the Golden Triangle going to be, continue to be this hotbed of institutional investment? My bet is that it absolutely will, simply because the land there is very good. It's close to population. It's close to transportation links. At the end of it all, everything else around that is to some extent a lesser trend or something that's not as important in determining the long-term value of an investment. So I think actually we remain in the early stages of what we are seeing as, call it a revolution, maybe that's too grand, over the past 5 to 10 years in this sector. But one of my favorite statistics is that we talk about potential growth in the European market. Within Europe, on average, the warehouse space per capita, the total modern logistics warehouse space per capita remains 1/3 of the level that it is in North America. And this is what is driving a lot of this growth in this sector. So logistics is going to continue to grow. Yes, not in some random way, and this doesn't necessarily mean that every logistics investment will be a good investment, but for sure there is structural growth coming in logistics. What exactly it looks like, we're going to have to work through that. But to put it in context, Germany, with 80 million people, the industrial heartland of Europe, manufacturing hub, yes, okay, a lot of manufacturing space and light industrial for sure. Very roughly, the approximate stock of modern logistics space is probably somewhere in the range of 20 million square meters. For comparisons purposes, the city of Chicago and northern Illinois, with maybe 1/8 of that many people, has around 180 million square feet or so, 150, 180 million square feet. So roughly, in rough order of magnitude, the city of Chicago has about as much warehouse space as Germany. And for me, when you put all of this together and you look at what's going on, I think absolutely you're going to see continued opportunities to invest in logistics, whether it is the larger, can we even call it traditional now, the traditional e-commerce facility, or the smaller, closer in, last mile delivery network. I think there's absolutely room for growth in both of these sectors for the next, and if I had to pick a time frame, I'd say probably 10 to 15 years until we plateau with the current business model of e-commerce.
And I think everyone's convinced that there is a lot more to come within logistics, and I think there's probably a lot of investors in the room that have already made up their mind that they should be looking at logistics. But we've just heard that, for example, inner city, these new depots might have a completely different cover ratio, and this will have an impact on the rent. And we had the topic of should you go multi-level. You've got increases or changes in the heights of the buildings. And when I started in this business 10 years ago, or a bit less than that, it was all very simplistic and simple in that you had a warehouse that was 10 meter high and it had to have a floor load of 5 tons and you had to have 1 dock per 1,000 square meters. And you could sort of tick your checklist and that would be it. And there was also a market rent for that. And in the Midlands, that would have been, I don't know what, £4 a square foot. And this was all very easy to underwrite. We recently looked at a big development site, fairly central into London, with a large occupier who was looking for a campus. And instead of, this was expensive land, filling this complete site with sort of the, let's put as much on it as we can to optimize land use and to get to what would have been, call it the market rent for that location. This occupier was telling us, no, I don't want all these buildings. I'd like you to stick to 25% site coverage. I need parking for my trucks, for my future fleet of electrical vehicles that is going to deliver into central London. And we were running that feasibility, that development, and we ended up with a rent that was probably 30 to 35% above what everybody would have considered the market rent. But the point is there is no comparable. This type of asset doesn't exist yet. It was just a buildup of all the costs, and that gave us the rent, but it happened to be exactly what this leading logistics provider was looking for. So I conclude that it must be the right thing to build. So I think that's a bit to the point of, yes, there is a lot to come, but I think things are getting a bit more complicated and need a little deeper look to figure out your investments. What is the right rent? What is the right product in each location? How do I navigate this sort of evolving space, or this space where maybe revolution is happening? Also in terms of building specs and sort of what occupiers are looking for.
Just to dive in.
Yeah.
So what we always see is a discussion about what is a core logistics building, and I think core logistics building, nobody can say it is 10 meters height or 12 meters height. So many times we get investors in the office and I said, listen, we want to buy core investment logistic buildings in Germany or in Europe, and then the discussion starts, what do you think is a core building? As Kristof is saying, it's not as easy as it was, 5-10 years ago. It's going more complex. Cross-dock, high-bay racking, truck, lorry parking. So it will become more complex, and I still think it's a question of location for the future. So the mega sheds, of course, will be outside of the big cities. But if you ask Amazon, Mr. Petzmann, who left, he's saying, yeah, listen, give me back the old freight stations, inner city freight stations from 20 years ago in Berlin, for example. There I can deliver my goods to the customers in 20 minutes proximity. So I think it will be quite more discussion about what's a core logistic building, where are the locations, how much is the rent, and of course we haven't spoken about rents and yields. What we see, especially in Germany, is a big disruption between yields, which is coming down more and more. But on the other hand, when you go on the developer side, there are rents below 2 euros. And I doubt this is economically working. Yeah? So there's a big discussion about that as well. Yeah.
I think one other bit, during the theme of diving in, I think one of the other issues is definitely that investors want to be as sure as possible that anything they invest in, particularly if it's development, is going to be usable by third parties. And if you look at an office or retail, generally that isn't so difficult, because you've got a retail location, unless it's been, let's say, completely obsolescent and gone to secondary or tertiary. Offices, they're obviously changing, but you're trying to make sure that it can be used by other occupiers. One of the issues that investors have got, and occupiers to a greater or lesser extent, is, can I use a facility? Going back to Ingo's point, it is very much location-led, but if you've got something that isn't usable by third parties and you've only got a 5-year lease, which increasingly is not going to be the case, for investors, they can have a major issue about that. So there's lots of conflicting, let's say, perspectives, and it's trying to rationalise that to make sure that investors will also keep preparing to put money into the sector. They can see overall there's got a great story ahead for logistics. Then you get down to the nitty-gritty, and it does that building work for more than one party?
And is that
an example? Yeah. Because we saw the Zalando building that was announced by Goodman. That's a 15-meter free height building with inside it 4-level pick towers. So that is effectively, it's not a fully multi-level building, but it's definitely heading in that direction. It was just up on your screen. So this is happening. This is happening right now, and it's being done by those leading occupiers. And we need to get our heads around, in terms of relatability, how to convert these buildings, what the right rental levels are, how we deal with them.